Hello everybody, welcome to Rusty Bucket. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already and drop a like on this video, and check us out over on Spotify and Apple Podcasts if you would like to enjoy this as an audio-only experience. With that said, we are back to NBA hot takes on Saturday as you have come to expect. So let's just get into it. From Cheeseman, if the Heat had won the 2020 championship instead of the Lakers, the narrative around it being a Mickey Mouse ring would be completely different. It would be much more widely recognized as one of the hardest NBA championships ever. Well, I do tend to agree with the notion that the bubble championship gets overhated specifically because it was LeBron and the Lakers that did it. And you know, that makes perfect sense. I don't think there's much arguing with it being over-exaggerated as a result of that. However, I do feel simultaneously that the degree in which that is the case is ironically also over-exaggerated, where people act like there is just no respect for the bubble championship and it's entirely because of that. Straight up, dude, I think the circumstances are too dramatically different from the normal thing that people are going to treat it like it's not the normal thing, and that was kind of always going to be the case. The reality is, eliminating the home court advantage factor, eliminating the crowd factor from it, period, just made it a very fundamentally different experience, even if the on-the-court stuff should be no different. Fact of the matter is that that type of stuff does matter and affect the results. Now, I also believe that if the Lakers and the Heat met up in the finals and they played in person against each other, home court advantage in favor of the Lakers, I still think the Lakers would have won that fucking series. But beating the Lakers and LeBron is something you get so much praise for that I could see the other end of it being the result of it just getting so much praise. I don't know. You're probably right. I do think Lakers fans have an unearned persecution complex, however. From Emmanuel C316, SGA is the closest we've seen to MJ/Kobe. People, especially those in media, keep wanting to push Ant as the next MJ/Kobe, face of the NBA, when if you actually watch Thunder games, SGA clears Ant in basically every category besides three-point shooting. Back to the Kobe MJ point, though, SGA is a mid-range assassin, much like those two, playing both sides of the ball, although not to the same degree, but still very solid on that end. Is a very efficient and deadly finisher, just maybe not as athletic in terms of posterizing the opponent's big man. I'd argue being shifty and able to control your body through contact is another version of athleticism, absolutely. Also has the same level of playmaking chops and is much more constant, being the engine of a team that is the top of the league in offense and also has a dedication to the game that isn't talked about. J-Dub said on JJ's podcast that SGA lives at the gym and is probably still at the gym right now as they speak. It was around 7 to 8 p.m. Dedication to the game, willingness to win, deadly slasher and mid-range shooter, good defender and playmaker. He is much more comparable than Ant is. SGA for MVP. Well, I've actually kind of parroted this point myself lately, where aesthetically speaking, I get a lot of Kobe vibes out of watching SGA. Now, there is a way that Shea moves his body that is different than basically any other player I've seen. Just the way that he moves, it's really hard to compare to anybody else. But in terms of the shot diet, in terms of the goals that they have as players, in terms of their mindset, in terms of their overall skill set, like just across the board, there is a lot of things in line. Like you mentioned, SGA is a really good slasher, as MJ and Kobe were. Great, all-time great mid-range shooter, just like Kobe and MJ were, especially MJ. Really good defensively, if sometimes a tad overrated just by how big their name is. That's definitely fair. You say he's not athletic in terms of posters. I would agree with that, but like you mentioned, the shiftiness and his control of his body is a version of athleticism that I would argue he has better than Kobe or MJ. But, like, I think the reason people are doing the Ant is the next Kobe or MJ thing instead of SGA is because SGA is Canadian and because people have decided to hate on him for shooting 9 free throw attempts per game, even though that is exactly what MJ and Kobe did in their peak scoring seasons. And yes, whether you would like to admit it or not, they did foul bait too to get plenty of those free throws, and they benefited from bad calls to get a good amount of those free throws. Just revisionist history, and the SGA foul merchant thing drives me up the fucking wall. But yes, To say that Shea is the next Kobe, if there was ever a pick to make, I think he's a better one than Ant. He's certainly a better one than Andrew Wiggins. And I don't really like the this player is the next this thing. But if we're going to be doing that, I'm shocked we've seen so little direct comparisons between SGA, Kobe, and Michael Jordan. From Azagoran, the Sonics will return and Rusty will become a Sonics fan and KD will join the management in his retirement as he's wanted to, but make bad deals for a team of ISO hoopers, leading Rusty to go on another Kevin Durant rant. Well, Kevin Durant going on to be the GM of a team that I start to like just to destroy it would be a great way to get revenge on me for much of my criticisms over the years. I at least think there's a decently high odds that he's seen my Durant hater manifesto. You know, I don't hate ISO hoopers necessarily. I just don't want a roster made of them because you need a lot more archetypes of players to actually win a championship than just the one. But based on Kevin Durant's track record with how he talks about the game and the type of players that he's tried to pursue being his teammates ever since leaving the Dubs, it would not surprise me at all if this ended up being true, unfortunately. From RRAA 1117 or LL17, I don't know. NBA fans have gotten used to underrating two-way players. After years where the best player in the league were guys like Steph Harden, post-Miami LeBron, etc., star players aren't expected to be great defenders anymore, and any star who is a great defender is often dismissed. AD, Giannis, Tatum, and Wemby are all victims of an era where their ability to play two ways is not appreciated, while stars like Jokic and Luka are automatically deemed as superior because of their box score, not overall impact. Well, you could argue this is a case of one extreme was necessary to destroy. The extreme of being like, you can't be the best player in the world if you're not a two-way player. That extreme was unnecessary, reductive, and illustrative of a certain era, a type of version of the NBA that we're just not in today. The reality is that offensive skill is much harder to develop. Being Luka Doncic is a lot harder than being Lou Dort. There's a lot more players closer to Lou Dort than there are Luka Doncic throughout history. So you can't just focus entirely on defense. And if you're the level of offensive engine of a Luka or a Jokic type, well, you can be the best player in the world as a result of that. However, I also feel like what I just said has now become such a commonplace opinion that the pendulum has swung in the opposite direction, to where you are right, and two-wayness and just the importance of being a good defender is a little undervalued. I felt like Giannis should have won one of Jokic's MVPs because of defense. Tatum, I think, gets disrespected a lot because people don't know the scope of just how damn phenomenal of a defender that guy is. I've been saying for years that he's the best defender on the Celtics. His versatility is a key reason why they were able to win the championship. But of course, his points per game number wasn't that high, and nobody paid no mind to how impactful he was on the defensive end. So it did not end up mattering in terms of what the narrative was. So you're absolutely right. We should pay more respect to these types of guys. From Ivan Popdato. Pippen crashing out over the whole Last Dance documentary and later to Jordan is very understandable. Not only is he only brought up to discredit Jordan, Last Dance that is supposed to cover the 90s Bulls just glazes Jordan after he took a 7-year, $11 million contract or something around that ballpark, and his ex-wife, a groomer, now dates Jordan's sons. Yeah, if you look into what Scottie Pippen's life has been over the last decade, it's understandable why he lost his mind. Also, the degree of just being like, yeah, I'm one of the greatest basketball players who ever lived, but I got paid like shit. That definitely had to sting. I understand why that bothered him. I understand why it would strike a nerve if 30 years later there's a clip of Michael Jordan saying that he was being selfish for caring about that contract situation. Meanwhile, Michael had just signed a 2-year, $60 million deal, which was just like an unprecedented amount of money at that time. I don't know. I think it was a blind spot on Mike's part and just a level of ignorance to other people's feelings, which does not surprise me that Michael might not be the most emotionally aware person in the world. But yeah, I can't blame Scottie Pippen at all for losing his mind. Has he said some terrible, stupid takes as a result of it? Yeah, but you know, sometimes you have to lose your mind and put out a bunch of terrible takes. Look at my MVP video. From Night Owl, the fear of a good player that Rusty mentioned in the video is a real thing. However, the joy that Steph and the Warriors played with at their peak is harder for an opponent to deal with mentally. While you can fear playing against someone, it doesn't necessarily make you play worse. Having a team beat you while having fun is much more demoralizing. Also, watching them have fun disrupts your rhythm if you don't play that way. Yeah, that's definitely fair. If you're not aware of the context from the last video, we talked about like Mario Chalmers or whatever saying that Jordan was better than LeBron just purely because of fear, because Michael was a more feared basketball player. That is a little silly. I don't think it matters that much. I think there are a lot of different things that can be demoralizing on a basketball court, but the number one thing is score more points than your opponent, and then the rest of that shit is just added dressing. You know, that's the cherry on top, but that's not what got you there. So I think when people put that at such a forefront of the conversation, whether it be about the GOAT or just how good players are, they're kind of putting the cart before the horse, or they're putting the cherry before the ice cream. How good are they at basketball? The rest of this shit feels fairly arbitrary and on the margins. But I do agree with you that, yes, looking at Steph smile and dance after he hits the most ridiculous shot ever on you, that has to sting. That shit has to suck. Okay, so a big thing that I want to address, the big controversy of this last Hot Takes episode was about my take about players taking pay cuts. I think there was some misunderstanding, A, about what I said, but also B, about what a pay cut even means. The big consensus reply was that, like, oh, that's just what these billionaire owners want. And, like, the idea that I would be a bootlicker to billionaire owners, disgusting, frankly. How dare you? So here's the thing about that. If a player takes less money, if they take a pay cut, guess what? That money can then be used to build the roster. It's not money that the player is leaving on the table so that it can go in the pockets of the owners instead. It's money that they're leaving on the table so that that money can be spent elsewhere. Now, there was definitely a conversation to be had about trust, which is highlighted right here by Joe. Take as much money as possible. You cannot trust GMs these days to keep their promise on building a team around you. And I understand that 100%. And I would just say that my argument that players should take pay cuts, it is heavily predicated on, like, with the understanding that you do trust that organization. So, like, an example would be Dirk took pay cuts, and that did help them win their championship in 2011, but it also, they didn't do a great job of pursuing it after, but they also ended up giving him a big, hefty paycheck to make up for it, which also, Dwayne Wade took a pay cut so that the Heat could sign LeBron James, and then they didn't give him that money. So the way that franchises operate and how much trust can be had between the player and the franchise is going to vary, obviously. But if you feel as a player that you are in a position where you can take that pay cut, you absolutely should, because that money can be distributed to someone else. Like, the argument that people were having is like, you want to give that money to the billionaire instead of letting the millionaire have it? No, I would like to give that money to another player. Distribute the wealth among the roster better rather than having it all go to the one guy. So yeah, it's very circumstantial, and I wouldn't largely just use the guise of judging players for taking money in the way that the take that I was responding to originally would. But, like, I absolutely think it should be more commonplace and normalized for pay cuts to happen, especially given the fact that money these days for NBA, the NBA players make is so off the wall high when you get to the highest level, that if you aren't comfortable with living on $40 million a year when you could have gotten 70, that's, I don't know, that's a you problem. I just can't, I cannot relate to that mentality at all. I'm not making decisions for these guys. It's just my opinion. I think it's good to give your franchise more options to build around you. especially if your priority is winning, which I would hope that it would be to an extent. I'm not saying you throw caution to the wind or anything like that. From court vision, the Spurs have a bit of a problem after getting Wemby so early in their rebuild. He's a generational talent, no doubt, but the rest of the roster just isn't going to help him out. Most of the supporting pieces are either unproven or just not that good, which means Wemby's going to have to carry way more than he should this soon. If the front office really wants to turn this team into a true contender, they're going to have to rely on trades to bring in legit talent because the current squad just ain't it. I think this is a kind of bad take, court vision, I hate to say, because the Spurs have two first-round picks in this year's draft, the Atlanta Hawks pick and their own. De'Aaron Fox just got shut down for the season with a pinky surgery, so they're definitely just fucking tanking. Like, just put on a finger brace. Surely it can't be that bad, man, but obviously they don't want to win right now. They're going to bottom out. They're going to have probably a bottom 5 or 6 record in the league, and they will likely get a pretty high draft pick with their own on top of a middle of the first round or even late lottery pick with the Hawks, depending on where they end up finishing in the standings after the play-in. So the Spurs have that going for them in the future. They also have the Hawks 2027 first, a 2026 pick swap with the Hawks. So they're going to get another high lottery pick young player to throw onto this team alongside Stephon Castle. And they're going to get another pick that could probably be a decent young player. On top of that, they have tradable contracts. And on top of that, they have a lot of salary cap flexibility going into the future, on top of having all their draft capital. So they might be in a position a year from now where they're too good to ever have a high draft pick. But so long as they land on it this year, and as long as they just manage their assets well, which they're starting from a good point at their baseline, then they're going to be just fine. The Spurs I don't think they're going to have too big of a problem with him, honestly. I think they're doing about as well as you could ask for at this point. From Pokebag, there should be a retired players game during All-Star Weekend. Invite everybody that's still physically capable to play basketball. Lower the rim a foot or two to make former dunkers shine in what they used to be able to do in their prime. Have an age limit between 55 and 60 so that the real old heads don't end up getting seriously injured. And instead of having 12-minute quarters, give them 10-minute quarters so they can rest longer. I believe we have seen some version of this. I know there's like maybe it's like a Gail Goodrich clip out there of him hooping when he's like in his 50s wearing like a Lakers jersey, like post-retirement. I don't know what this game that I'm referring to is, but I'm so sure that it happened. I also know there was like this NBA like Africa charity / exhibition game where Nikola Vucevic got scored on like 1 or 2 times by like a 50-year-old Hakeem Olajuwon. Absolutely wild shit. I get a real kick out of seeing former players suit up, even if it is I don't know, maybe a little gimmicky. It's still cute. I like it a lot. I enjoy it quite a bit. I don't know how easily you could get so many former players to do this. Like, you get like 1 or 2 of these guys in the celebrity game every year, and that's about the extent of what you're able to do. So I'm not sure, but it would be fun. It would be really, really fun, really, really enjoyable, and I think it would draw a lot of eyes and get a lot of nostalgia out there. So I think it would work for the NBA. It'd just be a matter of if you can actually get the people to do it. All right, this is going to be the last take of the video. Techs should be abolished. They serve very little practical purposes, disrupt the flow of the game, and are pretty much only given when the ref is on some kind of power trip. The less influence the refs have on the game, the better. I obviously think there are situations where you can cross the line, you know, say the wrong thing to a person where you absolutely deserve some level of consequence for it. But most of the time I do agree with this. I don't think that throwing players out of the game because they cursed at you or they, I don't know, complained in a way that you didn't like, let alone some shit like Tim Duncan smiling on the bench and getting thrown out. I don't know. I feel like more often than not when a player gets thrown out of the game on a tech, it bothers me. Like, I'm not referring to like you got, you know, 2 flagrant fouls and then you get kicked out. That's valid. That's a good system that exists and it should exist. But like the amount of times where a ref just absolutely power trips and decide that we're here to see them and not the player that they're kicking out, like especially just in terms of like just the good for the league type thing, like I think it's good if you allow the players to be a little bit more toxic and get away with it. It's the thing that people always claim that they want, and I think in large part they're right to want it. Like players being able to trash talk each other, players being able to like hit a shot and then point at that guy, or dunk on somebody and then point at that guy without any kind of consequence. I absolutely think that's the right way to do this thing. And yeah, I wouldn't say they should be abolished. That's an extreme that I just can't get behind. But like severely limited in their scope and volume, yes, I absolutely agree. Techs are overused, overdone, and more often than not annoying. That was Hot Takes. I want to say at the very end of this video, this is the first video, or maybe, no, this is the second video now that Nick will be editing for this channel. Nick was our editor for most of last year, but he is back. So show some love to Nick. Although I did put this at the end of the video because I don't want the comment section to be entirely that. But we love you, Nick, and we're glad to have you back. But with that said, that is it. Goodbye.